After the party, ow, what the fuck? Lethargic from having just opened her eyes, Sydney sat up in bed. Dominating the sensations in her left arm was the feeling of intense pain. She stared at the limb without any comprehension about what she was seeing. 4 deep scratches were running from her wrist to the crook of her elbow. The 2 middle ones were deeper of the 4, and in her stupor she wondered why they didn't bleed. All of the rest of her arm's delicate skin was inflamed and looked like it had been scalded. How in the hell did those marks get there? She put her other hand on her forearm and jerked it back. The pain flared in intensity as she winced and closed her eyes. Ignoring it seemed to help, and the pain subsided. From out of the darkness of her closed eyes, a form appeared. A writhing essence twisted and moved through her thoughts. Jerking her eyes open, the vision disappeared, and she hoped it was something that she was imagining. Left with unease churning in the pit of her stomach, she grabbed the teddy bear from the top of the oak nightstand. Squeezing the stuffed animal in a one-armed hug brought her a minute amount of comfort. Attempting to gather her thoughts, she wondered why she couldn't remember what happened. Then she realized that she must have amnesia. For some reason her mind was blocking out the memories, like she'd blacked out. "You must have had a really wild night, Sydney. The last time something like that happened was with that cute guitarist I met at the party." All she knew was that she woke up in bed him the next morning to her constant chagrin. With a sense of embarrassment, she was more careful from then on. She was still sure that he'd slipped something in her drink that night she wished she could forget. Well, if it happened before it could happen again, she guessed as she remembered that single event from her past. Looking around the room, her sense of comfort was enhanced by the familiar surroundings. Setting the teddy bear down on top of the pillow, she got up and went into the bathroom to bandage her arm. Looking at herself in the mirror, she noticed the dark circles that were under her eyes. Putting the sight out of mind, she opened the medicine cabinet door. She pulled out some gauze and antibiotic ointment and set them on one side of the bathroom vanity countertop. She squeezed some of the ointment out on the gashes, then stretched out a piece of gauze on them, making sure to carefully lay at her arm. Applying tape to affix the bandage more securely proved to be almost impossible. Her discomfort decreased as the ointment began to work in conjunction with the gauze to start the healing process. With the pain in her arm lessening, she was now aware of her headache. Breathing a heavy sigh, she got the bottle of ibuprofen out of the medicine cabinet. She opened it and popped a couple in her mouth. Trying to swallow them without any water, the pills seemed to get stuck and wouldn't go down further. Dunking her head under the faucet, she turned it on and took a sip of the trickling water to ease their transition down her throat. So she could now wake up, Sydney went into the kitchen and set the coffee maker up. While it was brewing, she sat down at the table and covered her face with her hands. Racking her brain for an answer, none came but the little vignettes that flashed in and out. A whirling dervish danced on the edge of her thoughts, just out of reach. Unable to extract the memories further, she looked towards the coffee pot and observed it had finished its brewing cycle. The full pot was now beckoning to her senses and desire of the wondrous substance. Getting up from the table, she pulled a cup out and filled it with some of the steaming brown liquid. The wonderful aroma and warmth captured her attention as she held the mug in her hand. Pulling out a chair, she down-sat at the table. Closing her eyes, she basked in the comfort that was in her grasp. A single sip accentuated the feeling that enthralled her. While entranced by the coffee, another set of visions fought for control of her mind. The rather disturbing things she envisioned, she wanted to block but had no success. The memory of a claw on her arm caused her body to jar as coffee spilled from the edge of the cup. Little drips hit the formica table surface and splattered outwards. Feeling once again how it entered her body as part of their unearthly coitus, she realized what happened as the cup dropped from her hands. It bounced off the table and shattered on the floor. I can't believe I did something like that with that monster. Her disdain grew as she realized what it was that she'd been with the previous night. The shock welled up within as she realized she might have to get a pregnancy test. Thoughts intermingled and conflicted within as she felt woozy, passed out and fell off of the chair to the floor. Waking several minutes later, her eyes opened to see the shards of the coffee cup and splattered liquid. Blinking her eyes, she stared in disbelief as it was almost beyond comprehension. Once more her stomach began to churn at the realization that what she remembered is what happened. The acid taste of bile tasted horrid as she cringed. Oh no, it can't be. What in the hell was that thing? She now knew why her mind was trying to block the images. It was something that was almost too much to handle. Pushing herself up from the floor was difficult with only one arm, but she finally managed to sit up. Her body jerking slightly caused pain to flare in her left arm as she grimaced again. Using the chair for leverage, she arose slowly until she was standing beside it. Feeling very weary, Sydney decided she needed to lie down. She left the mess on the floor as she headed towards the bedroom. Her stomach began to swell incessantly with every step. With breathing labored, she reached the bed, and as she sat down, she felt a severe cramp. Because of the overwhelming pain, she held both hands to her swollen abdomen. As the birth canal began to dilate, she fell over onto her side as she clenched up in excruciating pain. Her eyes filled with abject terror, she wanted to call someone to come help her, but she couldn't get up. Racked with pain, she felt somewhat better once she rolled onto her back. Pressure in her womb became intense as her legs spread, and she felt herself stretch. Wetness flooded out from inside her as the sheets and flowered bedspread became soaked, uttering screams that filled the room as she hyperventilated. She felt something come out of her, and the pressure began to decrease. Looking at what came out of her, she just about threw up. Seeing the horns coming out of its temples, red skin and a tail was shocking. Now the desire to shoot the thing drove her to reach for the nightstand drawer and open it. Pulling out the .38 from the drawer, she aimed at the thing with an unsteady hand as she squeezed the trigger. The shot sounded loud in the enclosed space of the bedroom. Pop, pop, pop. As the rounds missed, the creature reached out with its claws and sunk them into her leg. Jerking her leg away, she slid to the side of the bed and fell off. Holding the handgun in her hand, she kept it pointed at the thing that just came out of her as she made her way towards the door. I really have to get out of here. She backed away slowly with her attention riveted on the baby. A mist formed over the bed, and its skin changed from red to a lovely pink to her surprise. The horns and tail seemed to recede within until they no longer appeared. Irrevocably drawn to the now normal-appearing infant, she drew closer as another instinct took over. She wanted now more than anything to care for the little one. Still wary as she approached, the infant looked so helpless on the bedding. Hesitating a moment, she gazed on the baby before her. Laying the handgun on the nightstand, she picked up the infant and began to cuddle him. Pushing aside the warning her mind was screaming, she now held the child she had wanted for so long. Considering names as she rocked the infant, she finally selected Samuel. One day she would realize what it was that she was holding, but today was not that day. An old nursery rhyme ran through her head as she began to sing in soothing tones while rocking back and forth. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. The end. Dance of Death, April 1916. Sergeant Peter Casey looked up and down the trench his unit was camped out in these days. Walls of naked earth and piles of stacked sandbags made up the sides. Shallow ledges were dug into the sides where the men had tried to make a semblance of beds in the deep gash that ran about 1,000 feet through the French countryside. The ledges also served to help soldiers to get out of the entrenchment when it came time to charge the opposing forces the other side of no man's land. This one was just one of the many trenches that were gouged into the earth during this war that some believed would end all wars. Of course, those that believed that weren't out here on the front lines with the troops. The half-drums in the latrine dugouts were filled with excrement stank and overflowed with no place where they could be emptied. Many preferred to make cat holes, as they seemed cleaner. However, that would involve going out onto the open ground and into the line of enemy fire. No one liked the idea of getting a round in their arse. Burning the resulting effluent with some diesel mixed in did help to reduce the amount somewhat, but it left a lot of ash and the smoke was terrible. He was glad the 40-degree daytime high temperatures helped to keep the fly and mosquito populations down. Everything always felt wet and cold here in these damn trenches they now found themselves. Miles and miles they extended across the French countryside. A little comfort could be obtained when burning the empty armament crates or the little wood that could be found. But that pleasure was ephemeral and very short-lived. If there was a hell anywhere on earth, this surely must be the place where it was found. It seemed like an eternity ago when the unit had first gotten to France. He wished he could leave this putrid cesspool behind and go back to his home in Ireland and his beloved Margaret. She might be in England now, but the Emerald Island really was where home was for them. So many times when the hostilities died down, he would shut his eyes and envision wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. The newspapers trumpeted that they would all be home by Christmas a year and a half ago, back in August of 1914. Was that pronouncement ever proven to be completely misled? It also looked like they would be here at least another year if the lines didn't move. While the troops did move from place to place, the lines didn't seem to in a stationary impasse. Moving wasn't proving to be anything that was likely with this army. This stalemate was also proving to be something impossible to overcome to everyone involved. Every morning he looked out over the side of the trench toward the German lines in the unrealized hope their adversaries would be gone. Seeing his head peek up over the edge, they would fire off a shot which would hit the ground close by. He would drop back down and once again await orders from higher up, which never seemed to materialize. Impatience reigned supreme among the troops. Of course, it seemed that the generals didn't have a clue what was really happening out here on the front lines. It's not like you would actually see any of them come out here. Later in the day, once again, he would lead his men across the tangle of barbed wire, scorched earth and barren gnarled trees in the contested middle ground. The Germans would kill a few more of his men, like happened every day in this conflict. Then the Germans would make their daily push to cross the no-man's land. Before they could make their circuit, a few of them joined the ranks of the fallen. Late in the day, a temporary truce was called to halt the hostilities. During the short time it lasted, the medics and litter-bearers wore their white armbands while carrying stretchers or push wheelbarrows would run out and gather up the newly dead. He noticed one of his men writing a letter with difficulty on the stock of his Enfield with the weapon draped across his legs. Considering it a moment, Peter decided to disturb him. He walked over and put his hand on the man's shoulder. "How's that pretty wife of yours doing these days, Private Chauncey?" "She's doing all right, Sergeant, according to the letters I've gotten. The little ones are looking forward to going home when the war is over. He frowned as he gazed into the distance. Guess they are driving my wife nuts, all being shut in because of the war. Everyone there is still scared about the Zeppelin attacks that happened a year ago. Well, I hope all this ends soon, Private, so you can get back home and start giving her a break. The private began giggling and had a hard time getting out the words. But if I were at home, I would miss the pleasure of your company, Sergeant. He couldn't help but start laughing. Are you really sure about that, Private? Of course I'm sure, Sergeant. Both of them heard the whistle of a shell coming towards which broke up their laughter. Looking up, they could see it was coming towards their position. The two of them ducked down and squatted near the bottom as the shell exploded just past a curve in the trench. Dirt and debris poured down on the two of them from the explosion. Peter felt something heavy land on top of him. Pushing it off, he cringed when he noticed it was someone's leg still wearing a boot. Unlacing the boot to slip it off the limb to see whose name it belonged to, he was saddened. So many times it was the only way they to find out. Oh no, it's Corporal Jensen. I'll miss him a lot. Sighing heavily, he pulled his little notebook out of his shirt pocket and added the name and date to the rather long list. Since Gallipoli, he had already filled up 2 of the little pocket notebooks, and this one was quickly running out of room. When he slept at night, those whom he had written down would walk by him in a silent procession. Sleep would flee, and he would be awakened in the dark. More than once he'd been told that he'd been screaming at the top of his lungs. There had just been so many of them over the last year and a half that his insomnia was becoming a regular occurrence. He was tired of waking up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, but couldn't do anything about it as long as he was a part of this insanity he was sent to. Putting the little book back into his pocket, they heard another whistle overhead. Looking up, he was kind of glad this one looked like it would overshoot the trench. It didn't overshoot by very far, though, and exploded a short distance away. The concussion could be felt in the bottom of the trench as some of the loose dirt fell on the British regulars. One soldier several yards away jumped up to the top of the trench and knocked 2 of the sandbags down on some of his fellow soldiers. He yelled out loud to all that could hear, "I've been buried alive." Launching himself over the side to level ground, he screamed out loud. Running from the trench, heedless to all, he made it to the first rolls of barbed wire where he was caught. He continued screaming as the German machine gun cut his body to ribbons until he was finally silent. Some of the other soldiers grabbed their rifles and began using the young man's corpse for a target practice until they were stopped by their superiors. Later he would have to find out who it was that snapped and ran headlong into no man's land. Second Lieutenant Dobbs sent the runner to tell all of the troops that it was time to get ready for the daily charge. They were about to run across no man's land in the insane pursuit of trying to get to the other side before being cut down. His fellow soldiers all grabbed their rifles and mentally prepared themselves. Some made the sign of the cross across their chests. Though he didn't say anything to anyone around, Peter thought to himself that God didn't exist here. Only pain and death surrounded them all. Other soldiers just stood there, awaiting the order to run towards the combatants. Hearing the signal whistle, they all poured out into no man's land and began to move towards the German lines. Before making it very far, they heard the pop of a mustard gas container as it released its contents. The yellow-brown smoke rolled outwards from the canister. A few near it caught a whiff of the sweet, spicy scent and reached for their gas masks. Many managed to get them on in what they felt was time before they breathed in much of the toxic substance. A few others, mostly new soldiers in their haste, ended up dropping theirs on the ground before they could get them on their heads. Peter hoped he wouldn't be losing too many tonight. The blisters and coughing that accompanied the agony would be terrible. he was glad that it appeared the gas was dissipating quickly due to its transient essence and the slight breeze. Those who attempted to shoot while wearing their masks found that it was very difficult to do with any accuracy. It was almost impossible to sight down the barrel to aim. Shots wildly rang out from the single-shot Enfields. Some held their weapon beside their hip in gunslinger fashion and attempt to aim it with their body. Many of the fallen were caught in the barbed wire coils as they were hit by rounds. Their eviscerated remains were kept from falling to the scorched earth by the wire and stakes. After those that were still among the living and sentient made it back to the trench, it was the German troops' turn to do the same thing. At the sound of the whistles, they evacuated their trench and slowly made their way towards the British troops. Most of them made it to the middle before hearing the whistle that signaled retreat, as too many soldiers had fallen. Firing at the advancing German soldiers, Peter's thoughts wandered between shots. This war of attrition is just stupidity in action. Once they had returned to the safety of their trench, the medics ran out with their various conveyances to pick up the bodies of the fallen in the middle ground. While they ran to and fro, something unusual began to happen as the bodies began twitching and moving. Then one of the bodies sat up in the wheelbarrow one of the medics was pushing along. I'm positive that I checked his pulse. He dropped the handles of the wheelbarrow and stood in shock as he looked confused. His mouth hung open as he watched the corpse stand erect and begin to walk around. The ones caught in the barbed wire also began twitching. Another one got up behind him and walked into him, the corpse's arms draped around the medic. Turning his head, he looked into a pair of glassy eyes that vacantly stared. Screaming, the medic broke loose and began running headlong back towards the British lines. Before he got far, he tripped over another one of the reanimated bodies that was getting up. Both sides couldn't help but stare at the unbelievable scene that was playing out. A single shot fired from the far end of the trench goaded the rest of the troops into action. All began to fire at their former comrades. Now, however, when hit they didn't fall down again. They began to wander the battlefield aimlessly in a macabre dance. Reaching the trenches, the dead were falling forward onto the soldiers, regardless of what side they were on. None of them apparently knew who was who, as chaos reigned supreme. Seeing that the rifles and machine guns weren't working to eliminate the new threat, Sergeant Casey grabbed a flamethrower he spotted nearby. Picking it up, he slipped his arms into the straps as he collected his thoughts and prepared himself. Double-checking the fit, he stepped up to the dugout ledge. Jumping up out of the trench, he began spraying fire every time he seen something moving. Once the former comrades and enemy were caressed by the flames, their uniforms would catch fire. Slowly they would spin in place as they were consumed by the flames, as if they were dancing in place. Falling down their bodies were blackened and turned to charcoal. No one attempted to put out the burning corpses as they were trying to get out of the way. Terror reigned in those that were alive and were watching incredible scene. Anguished calls were uttered as some of the living began running from the scene. High explosive shells fired into the surroundings took out some more of the ones wandering out in the battlefield. Fragments flew through the air and decapitated others. Those that had been buried nearby now began to arise to join the other reanimated corpses. Some of those that were digging themselves out of the mass graves were quite rotted after being interred for several weeks. Bloated, purplish bodies churned their way out of the shallow pits they were buried in to become a part of the chaotic scene. Lines of demarcation blurred as every effort was made to eliminate this threat completely by all. So many soldiers were being killed by these new combatants. Shortly after, they would also rise and become part of the incredible ballet that was ensuing. The last of the napalm in the canister ran out that Peter was using. He watched the stream of flame as it drooped and finally extinguished itself. Slipping the tank off of his back, he threw it at the nearest wandering, disinterred, bloated soldier, knocking him to the ground. Shoving the unit off, the man began to get up once more. Another soldier carrying one of the flamethrowers fell near Peter. He wrenched the flamethrower unit off of the man and put it on. Double-checking the fit of the tank, he made a few minor adjustments until it was comfortable. With the butt of his rifle, he smashed in the corpse's head. Looking at the now mangled head, it crossed his mind how this one could reanimate also. He took his bayonet out of its scabbard and cut the head away from the body. At least this way, this one won't be coming back to life on me. Wearing the tank, he walked around shooting flames at those who were now reanimating and beginning to wander about. The odor of incinerated flesh assaulted the senses, especially when one of the burning bodies ran by heedlessly. When they fell into a hole near Peter, he would point the nozzle at the hole and apply a stream of fire. In a short time, this second canister also was depleted and became a rather lightweight burden. Throwing it into one of the flaming depressions, the residual fumes inside expanded and it exploded. It shot out like a rocket and decapitated another one of the newly disinterred bodies, now aimlessly wandering around. Peter's eyes searched in vain for another flamethrower unit to put on. However, while looking around, he spotted the unattended portable mortar tubes at the edge of the entrenchment. A plan of how to use them effectively now came together in his mind. Now that something could maybe do some good. Affixing his bayonet on the end of the barrel, he ran to the mortar tube to take possession of it. As he took hold of the device, he felt hands touching his body. Turning, he used his rifle butt to batter the hands and the body they belonged to into submission. Spotting the phosphorus and high explosive rounds, he began to smile. Peter realigned the device so it wouldn't send a round as far as before. Throwing one of the high explosive rounds down the tube, it fired off. He watched as it arced into the contested middle ground and took out a few more of the walking dead. Several shots later, he ran out of the high explosive rounds. Though he had obliterated most of Walking Dead in a good amount of area, there was still more to do. All that was left now was a few phosphorus rounds. Scratching his head, he thought about how to use them best. Usually they were only used to light up the battlefield at night. Knocking the legs out from under the front of the tube, he pointed the end towards some far trees. Reaching over, he grabbed one of the rounds and threw it down the tube. It shot into the middle of a group of the dead. Hitting one of them in the stomach, his whole body lighted up until he looked like a shining star. Moving forward a few more paces, he lit up a few more of his neighbors. Each round he shot off exited the tube with a dull pop. Many of them hit their intended targets, but not all of them did. A couple of the Germans hiding in their trench caught a couple of the rounds. Then Peter managed to hit the German ammunition dump quite by mistake. It looked lovely going off with the explosions and rounds firing off in the crates. While their numbers were severely depleted before, this almost totally decimated those that remained. Guess they'll probably want to give me a medal for that. One phosphorus round left. I'd better make this last one count. He scanned no man's land and didn't notice any that were left wandering around. Noticing a little stack of potato masher fragmentation grenades, he grabbed a handful and signaled to a couple of soldiers that were nearby to come and grab a few of their own. Together they began walking the field, searching for any that might be remaining. After canvassing most of the area, they stopped to confer. They realized that there wasn't any more of them left. Together the 5 soldiers decided to keep the incident quiet and swore a blood oath. A cabal of complicity was formed. It would look much better that way to their commanding officers in the army if they just kept it quiet. There's no way they would be believed if they told what actually happened on this day. No matter what, none of them would divulge what happened, or another member of the group would kill them. The end en las sombras, May 1861. For several weeks, J. Grayson had been traveling to the west at a steady pace. As the days stretched on, he kept extending the distance he had transversed as a listless vagabond. He estimated that he had traveled about 1,000 miles since the day first he set out on his exploration of the continent. Because he had so much time for thinking, his mind would wander in an endless cycle as feet pumped in an endless rhythm. I swear they can have their stupid war. What the hell do they need me for anyways? Besides, what in the hell would I care about freeing some goddamned Negroes? On the high plains, about the only people he met were the Comanche natives who were out riding their horses to unknown destinations. Jay imagined that they were seeking the buffalo he had heard about that lived in great herds on the wide open plains. Their spotted ponies were easy to recognize, as were the riders who wore leather leggings. None of them came over to where he was, but out of curiosity they would stop for a few minutes as they watched him pass by. Other than the occasional Comanche, his only other companion was the constant wind that blew all the way through Kansas. He was glad he hadn't seen too many white people now that he had reached the Rocky Mountains. Mostly the ones he met were the trappers who couldn't care less about much of anything except the beaver pelts they sought. None of them apparently had heard the news of what was happening back east, and none of them seemed to be interested enough to ask any questions. The first 2 to 3 days after he set out from St. Louis, his feet developed large blisters, and his feet became quite painful. Just about the time he felt he couldn't walk any longer, he managed to find a boat that was tied to bank and was unattended by the owner. With it, he began pushing his way up the river. Of course, he was positive the owner would never miss it, or at least Jay assured himself that was the case. He twisted his morals to be servile to his purpose. It was just a means to an end for him to borrow the boat, and the right and wrong of morality really didn't enter into the decision. Besides, he had every intention of returning it some point in the future. The muscles built up in his arms as he worked the oars and a pole he found while pushing his way up the Arkansas River. During the time his feet rested and recuperated in the bottom of the small vessel, they felt much better after he lacerated the blisters on the soles to release the pressure that had built up. After a few days, they healed and disappeared. It worked really well until the river seemed to totally disappear in some sand, and he had no choice but to let the boat drift away. He thought of tying it up at the bank, but decided to let it float away. In his way of thinking, he was returning it to its owner, though if he'd really thought about it, he would have realized he wasn't. Still, the boat, while he had it, made his journey somewhat easier for the short period he had it. Even if he was fighting the current, he still made progress towards his destination in the mountains of Colorado Territory. Now that he was walking again, his feet toughened up while following the course of the Arkansas River. About the only thing resembling a town he encountered so far was a flea-bitten, dusty former fur trading outpost called Fort Pueblo. The wooden gates were barely attached, and some of the adobe walls had fallen down. Peeking inside, the roofs that he could see from the entranceway had caved in. It was obvious this state of decrepitude he found the place in had existed for some time. A whiff of rot and decay reaching his nose dissuaded him from further explorations. The high mountain pass he found himself now was quiet, except for the sound of the wind in the aspen trees. Many of them were just budding for the spring, and the air felt chilly. He now wished that he had brought a heavier coat with him when he started out. In the places that were shadowed, the ice hadn't melted yet in the small, fast-moving streams he encountered. In some places under the trees, the snow still blanketed the reddish soil. High above, the pinnacles of the mountains were still completely covered in a bright white expanse. He was glad that he probably wouldn't be wandering around in those lofty heights. A rustle off to his left caused to stop in place and quickly scan his surroundings. I hope it isn't a bear that I'm hearing. His eyes widened in fear as they caught the movement of one of the bushes. The rustling grew louder as the motion grew more violent. An elk stepped out into the opening and gazed at Jay, who was gripped by a palpable fear. His heart was pounding loudly in his ears. The large animal craned forward to sniff the air in the direction of the very scared human it had encountered. Uttering a bark, it turned its attention elsewhere and continued on its way into the trees. Breathing a loud sigh, he stood for several minutes as he waited for his heart to settle down. Once the loud thumping in his chest decreased, he continued on his way. Why did I get so damn jumpy in that place back there? I really need to stay calm. Rounding the bend in the stream, he could see a beautiful lake ahead. The rarefied air and excitement of his shock made him feel so alive. He looked around and noticed a great place to lay out his bedroll just above the water's edge. A bed of pine needles with a flat rock next to it caught his interest. That looks like the perfect place for me to camp for the night. Jay went down to the water's edge and took off his boots, socks, and shirt so he could clean a little of the dirt. Dipping his bare feet in the frigid water sent a shock through his entire body. Hyperventilating, he became lightheaded and everything became blurry as he just about fell forward into the water. After sufficient numbing in his feet, his vision cleared once more. Then he began cleaning his upper with his socks. He gingerly touched them to his chest like a washcloth after getting it wet in the icy coldness of the lake. After having cleaned off much of sweat of the days previous, he waded out of the water to a rock on the shore. Setting his feet up on the rock, he attempted to dry them in the sun. Next to his feet, he laid his socks. While waiting, Jay sat and contemplated the mountains and wished he had a way of capturing the beauty of nature that was surrounding him. The temperature started to drop, and it was growing cold as the sun began to drop behind the horizon, so he slipped his socks and boots on. Searching the nearby surroundings for some sticks, he soon had a few accumulated into a small stack. He also collected some rocks so that he could assemble them in a ring. On the flat rock beside where he laid the bedroll out, he set up a little pile. Looking at a couple of them, he realized that some of them were a little long, which got him thinking. I have to get a hatchet when I can. Taking one of the rocks that was triangular-shaped and had a sharp edge, he did his best to chop the longer ones shorter. Within the circle of stones, he arranged the sticks on a flat rock. Next to it, he rolled out his bedroll and got it ready. Sitting on his bedroll, he watched the sun disappear behind the mountains to the west of the place. Darkness fell quickly as nightfall descended. He got out his striker and held it over the tinder. A couple of sparks, and he had the fire going. As the fire began burning in earnest, the moon began to rise over the mountains to the east. The sparkling stars and full moon were reflected on the water. A million shining spotlights reminded him of jewels in the inky blackness. It felt so very relaxing while he sat on top of his bedding. Even the howl of a wolf in the distance didn't bother him. Later, the fire burned down until just embers were left. A light moved across the sky from the north. At first, it just looked like a shooting star. Curiously, he watched as it grew larger while it got closer to this secluded place. Soon he could also discern red, green, and blue lights that were flickering over the surface of something that had the vague appearance of a pumpkin seed. What in the hell is that thing? It continued to move steadily until it stopped directly over Jay's campsite. It now crossed his mind that maybe he should find some place to hide before too long. He wished that he had paid more attention during the daylight when he was able to see the area encompassing the campsite clearly, when he could have committed to memory. 3 beams of light were emitted out of the bottom of the object in the night sky. All of them began following each other in a circular arc. Jay got up and turned while watching the entrancing sight that going on around him. Then part of a tree fell off when one of the beams contacted it. His mouth gaped as he heard it hit the ground. Then he stared at the thing overhead in the sky. What is going on? I don't understand, and I think I should go now. The thing resembled nothing he had ever experienced. He remembered that the underside of the rock he set up the fire on was open underneath and turned into a cave. Getting down on all fours, he made his way to the edge and crept over. He lost his footing and slid down the slope until he reached a flat spot. A few feet away from him was the darker spot he knew was the opening to the shallow cavern. Attempting to feel his way inside, he struck his head on the low overhang in the little space. In the darkness, stars appeared in his vision, and pain flared as his hand reached up involuntarily to rub his head. Finding a narrow ledge to sit down on, he looked out and could hear more of the tree branches dropping from the trees. I wish I had some answers to what is going on out there. The ledge he was sitting on was vibrating, and he heard a humming noise. Loose gravel cascaded down on him from the roof and the walls. He realized that the roof could fall in easily, and he could end up crushed by the large piece rock. Oh no, I'd better get out of here. Getting up, he made his way back towards the opening. Craning his head out, he looked up into the sky. The spacecraft had descended into the clearing the red light beams had cut a swathe into. In the darkness, he began climbing back up the side of the mountain so that he could see where it was. Greeting his eyes was a large triangular-shaped object. Various colored lights traveled along and illuminated the length of the thing. Damn, that thing is sitting on top of my bedroll. The leg of the object was plunked down in the middle of his blanket, where he'd just been sitting just before attempting to hide. He started back down the mountainside, hoping he could make it to the stream. Even with the full moon lighting the way, it was still difficult to see as he made his way down the slope. Many times his foot would slip and his breath would catch. Before getting very far down, 2 little grey men appeared on top of the flat rock and were looking down on him. With the faint glow that emanated from them, they were easy to see. One looked back over his shoulder to something else and pointed down at Jay. Oh no, they've seen me. He wished that he could crawl underneath something, but it was too late. One of the creatures held out their arm, and a green beam of light came out. Jay felt himself lift off of the ground and up into the air. Watching the ground passing beneath, he started to scream. Then the green beam changed to blue as he was sat down beside the craft. Putting out his arms, he found himself inside of some kind of clear blue bubble. Touching it, he felt an electric shock travel up his arm and into his body and intensified the queasiness in his stomach. He crossed his arms and stood as still as possible in the middle of the sphere. It lifted off gently and moved over the craft. A circular hole opened up, and his round prison descended into the opening. The lights came on in the room as the hole above closed. Around him the bubble faded until it disappeared. 2 of the little grey creatures each took an arm and led him to a long grey table. Struggling against their grip just made them hold him tighter as they forced him onto his back on the table. Fear gave way to anger, which he then turned to insolence that he internalized. They put his arms inside of straps and tightened them down. Next, they cinched down his chest and legs. The little grey men stepped away from the table and went to separate consoles on opposite sides of the room. Jay squirmed to get loose from his bindings and discovered that he couldn't release himself. He was now the prisoner of the grey creatures. Whether he liked it or not, there would be no escape. One of the creatures came back and was pushing a tray with a number of metal tools. It selected a long needle-shaped object, which it inserted in his arm at his elbow. Burning pain accompanied the insertion as he grimaced in pain. The other alien picked up another hooked instrument off of the cart and inserted it Jay's nose. After feeling painful pressure, something seemed to boring up his nasal passages and pain registered behind his eye. What in the hell are they doing to me? I want this to stop now because they're hurting me. The first alien with the needle it shoved into his arm pulled it back out and took it over to one of the consoles. Out of the corner of his eye, Jay watched as the alien took a tube out of the needle and put it in the console. He tried without success to try to understand the screen the grey creature was looking at intently. Characters seemed to float across the display. An excited, noisy chitter was emitted from the alien to the one standing beside Jay, holding the nasal probe. The closer alien took the probe out of his nostril and laid it on the tray. Joining the other alien at the console, it looked intently at the characters on the lighted panel. Both of them started to unintelligibly chatter in an excited manner as they both pointed out something Jay couldn't discern. There was a pain behind his eye still, even after the probe was removed. Blinking involuntarily, the pain receded from his head until it was a dull throb. The sounds they made became voices deep inside of his head. "Can this be right?" the first alien said. "Run the test again if you don't believe it, Zildjian." "But I've ran the test twice already. It has to be right." Both turned and gazed at their captive. Zildjian asked, "Can you hear both of us now?" "Yes, I can." "We've decided to keep you a little longer." "Why would you want to do that?" "I think I'd rather leave, actually." "We're going to study you a little longer. What are you called?" "Why in the hell couldn't I have gone to the war instead? If I had, I wouldn't be here now." "My name is Jay Grayson. That's what I'm called anyways." "Can you let me up?" "I won't try to get away." "Okay, let him loose Alter." As Alter began loosening the straps, Jay rolled his eyes as he scanned the room looking for anything he could use as a weapon. Everywhere was a monotony of smooth flowing surfaces, textures and unbroken lines. Also, nothing was loose except for the items on the tray, and none of those implements looked like they would be very useful for something he could utilize. What he wanted right now was a gun or a club, but it was obvious there wasn't anything like that in close proximity. Alter guided him to a recess at the side of the room and opened the door. Once inside, the door closed behind him, and Jay found himself in a little room. Just like the rest of the ship, there weren't any sharp corners anywhere, and all surfaces were nondescript. He explored every square inch and felt along the walls. Most of the surfaces were made of some spongy substance that he depressed when he touched it, and was like anything he'd ever seen before. One place gave a little more than the others, so he pushed harder and ripped a hole in the partition that divided the spaces. Falling out into a narrow passageway, he looked both ways. What looked like girders etched into the walls greeted his eyes. "Oh, I hope I don't get seen again by any of those creatures." Noticing that the air was flowing, he wet his finger and held it up to find out the direction it was moving. Following the air, he traversed the hallway which opened out to a narrow catwalk. He kept his hands on the railings that extended both directions and had to keep ducking his head, which slowed his progress. Light was transmitted from a hole in the floor, and one of the girders descended through the middle of it. That must the way out of this place. He got his body to the outside of the railing near the girder-like thing that was extending through the hole. Steeling himself, he flung himself at the girder, hoping he would succeed at getting a good hold. Grabbing it with his good arm, he barked both shins on the metal as the sensation of pain registered. His arm was still painful from the needle's insertion earlier, which also caused him to wince. He came close to falling down instead of continuing to grip the hard, shiny metal. The pain thankfully was receding as he stopped for a few moments to close his eyes and gain control his thoughts. Steadying himself, he began to lower himself down the metal structure and through the opening lower down. The hole was almost too small for him to go through, but by wiggling his body with care, he succeeded. As his head emerged, he looked around, and to his surprise, they were now hovering over the lake. Blinking at the sudden brightness of daylight, he now realized he had been inside the ship for several hours. Directly below the water was shimmering as it invited him. It was now or never. He pushed away from the girder and fell what seemed to be a long distance. The cold water sent a shock through his body as it penetrated deep within his body. Scanning the shore, he picked what looked to be the closest place, and he began swimming towards it. Every few feet, he stopped to look up, making sure the craft wasn't returning for him. The last thing he wanted was more of that wonderful hospitality his captors regaled him with. About the best thing about the coldness of the water was his arm went numb as he traversed the distance. Before he reached the shore, he noticed the craft had started returning. Oh no, they've noticed I'm not in that room now. Taking in a gasp of air, he dived under the surface to try to hide. Jay couldn't stay under for very long though. He had to reach the surface when his chest began to hurt. Breaking the surface to gasp for breath, he watched the strange craft pass overhead and move off into the distance. Guess they weren't after me again after all. Taking a few moments, he steadied his breath while treading water. He began swimming towards what looked to be the closest convenient spot along the shoreline. Now he had a few decisions to make about where his travels would lead him as he headed into distant reaches. The end witchery afoot, ignorance and prejudice and fear walk hand in hand. Witch Hunt, Part 3 of Fear. Rush, late September, 1672. Touches of frost dusted the leaves and grass early that frosty morning. A thick covering of leaves crunched as Margaret searched for valerian among the trees and red sumac that had lost half of their leaves. The roots would be useful in the medication she would be making later in the day. She always enjoyed it here, in the quiet of the forest away from the town. Many times she could hear the tall sentinels as they whispered to one another in their long-forgotten language. Whenever she touched their trunks, she could commune with them through her thoughts. June Ludlow had been suffering throughout her pregnancy while carrying her 10th child. The town doctor couldn't seem to do anything for her. Then again, maybe he just didn't want to. The general attitude was that it was God's will if a woman died during childbirth. Far too many graves were filled by those who were trying to bring a new life into the world. As a result, there were many women of the area that chose to come to Margaret instead of seeing the doctor during a difficult pregnancy. At least there was a better chance that both the mother and child would survive. The early morning chill seemed to sink deep into Margaret's bones. A shiver involuntarily travelled through her body. To help ward off the cold a little, she drew the red wool cloak in tighter to herself. Finding one of the plants, she began digging in around the root with her sharpened stick. Being careful, she removed the dirt and was able to extricate it in one piece. Opening the little satchel she was carrying, she placed the root in it. Noticing an elm tree nearby, she decided she should get some of the bark. It would be useful ground up and given as fever reducer and to help relieve pain. Lately her stock had been getting a little low with all of the requests there had been. Making her way over to it through the underbrush, she carefully cut away some of the useful substance with the knife she was carrying. The pieces made their way into the satchel with its other contents. Asking the tree for forgiveness, she closed her eyes as laid her hands on the trunk. Taking her hands off of the trunk, she inspected the area around her. I wish I could find more, as June will need a lot more throughout her term. While it was never very easy to bring a new child into the world, this one definitely proving it wouldn't be. Lost in her search for some more valerian, she continued to search between the trees. Reaching an opening in the forest, she could see the rooftops over the planks of the palisade around Southmore. Oh no, I've gotten too close. I need to watch where I'm at all times. Her eyes got wide as she desperately hoped that hadn't been spotted by any of the watchmen. Every day at least one of them would walk along the walkway at the top of the wall to spot the natives. After the vicious attacks that happened the last few years, it seemed to be good insurance. While the women willingly went out of their way to consult her, most men weren't of the same persuasion. Some of them in the town called her a witch and said she was in league with the devil. It was obvious that some would have burned her at the stake gladly. The pure vitriol was amazing. Many times when she was in the village, she heard the scripture quoted, usually in passing, especially by the preacher. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, as it's been stated in the good book." I wonder, what's so good about it when it says things like that? Little did anyone know the real truth of what she really was. What her motivations were, they weren't interested in. She wasn't entirely sure that they could handle it if they knew either. It was just something they didn't care about. There so much that they just couldn't understand or seem to be able to tolerate. An entire town was living in abject fear, just like in so many other places throughout the countryside. Sneaking back around behind, they could hook on her wool cloak and tear it if she wasn't careful. With winter coming soon, she would be able to get another one very easily either. Weaving her way carefully through the grove, she reached the delightful meadow on the other side. After the chill of the grove, it felt quite a bit warmer in the full sun of the clearing. She removed the hood of the cloak from over her head. Her long brown hair was now free to cascade down her back and shoulders. Absent-minded, she reached up and moved the stray hairs back that had fallen in front of her face and tickled her nose. Following the little trail, she walked through the meadow to her little hovel on the other side. She ducked as she entered the opening and hanging skin that acted as a doorway. The curve of the roof and the outer wall was created by the bent saplings that were ingeniously woven together, much like an upside-down basket. Bits of moss and mud inserted in any gaps helped to insulate the walls from the inevitable drafts during cold weather. In the middle of the floor was the well-used hearth and cast-iron kettle covered in smudges. Still glowing embers from the early morning's fire added some warmth to the space, but there was still a chill. Throwing a couple more branches on the coals set them aflame to heat the place up. The stones arranged in a ring around the hearth were scorched and blackened by the numerous fires that were set over the last 2 years. A few of them were cracked and broken when the fire was stoked until it became roaring to warm the shelter. During the winter that happened quite often. Margaret warmed her hands a few moments, rubbing them together in the rising heat. She could feel it penetrate throughout her entire body from where it faced the crackling blaze. Clenching and unclenching her hands a few times, she made sure that she could move them. She turned and stepped towards the table along the wall where the old leather-bound book sat in the middle of the top. Opening it, She looked at the curious symbols covering the margins of the pages that formed a border around each of the handwritten spells. Seeing them brought back memories from a time now in the past. Many of them were from languages that were no longer spoken. They had been written down by numerous conjurers over the millennia the book had existed. She had tried to sit down and read through the book to explore it fully when she was much younger. That didn't go so well during her perusal, as the symbols changed and began to appear as if they were writhing upon the parchment pages. She was lucky that her teacher Cynthia came into the room and could see what was transpiring. Just as a set of claws began to reach out from within, she slammed the cover closed. It blocked the view of what appeared as the parchment disappearing to become a bottomless pit. From that moment, it was indelibly imprinted on her mind so that she would never again forget it the rest of her life. Cynthia admonished Margaret as she set book aside. "Be careful with this book. A lot can easily happen if you aren't." From that day forward, she took her teacher's every word to heart. Together they applied a set of spells that were intended to help keep the magic in check from escaping. She continued to wander through the memories. "That is something that could be really dangerous, and not just for you if they ever got loose," Cynthia further warned. With her head bowed to show submission to her teacher's authority, "Okay, I will. I can understand your being curious. I was once just as curious as you are this moment." Margaret gazed into the pleasant black eyes of Cynthia. "You were?" "Well, yes, I was. Long ago was saved by my teacher long ago, the same way I just saved you." She cracked a smile at her student. Margaret nodded her head slightly. "I'm glad that you were. I had created a spell that I shouldn't have, when I created something that I shouldn't have. She came in at just the right moment and kept me from getting hurt." Registering a look of astonishment, Margaret asked, "You really created a flaming bird?" "Yes, according to the annals, they are something that's called a phoenix, and they are very dangerous. I was really lucky. That time, of course, it burned just about everything in the place. Just be careful with that book from now on." "Okay, I will be." Having had enough of an excursion into the past, she now turned her attention to the book in front of her. By memory, she now turned to the correct pages that she needed for the spell. With the book lying open, she pulled the mortar and pestle off of the little shelf it was occupying. Setting it down to the left of the book, she began to make the concoction. Valerian root, echinacea, cinnamon and ginger were all ground together and mixed. Thoroughly prepared, she poured the mixture into some folded paper. When she needed some of it, June would be able to pour some into a cup of tea to help ease her pain. Having completed her primary project, she stood lost in thought. What should I do next? I know, I should try that one next. She grinned as she turned a few pages to the spell she was interested in trying. Together in the cauldron, she mixed feldspar, Queen Anne's lace, and a number of items. They began to mingle as she ground them, and a blue glow began to emanate from within its confines. Wispy tendrils were creeping up and over the sides until they were forming into kind of a luminous puddle on the table. As it coalesced together, the pooling essence began getting larger until it turned into a glowing bubble. Then it poured over the edge of the table onto the stone floor. There it began to take the shape of a person standing next to her. Holding out a few strands of hair to the glowing form, it sent out a string-like appendage. Wrapping around the hairs, it gathered them into itself as it solidified its essence. "Go do what I bid you to do now. Seek the owner of the hairs and give them a greeting." The entity that had become almost solid began to disintegrate once again into kind of a mist. Searching along the wall, it was unable to find any spaces between the thatching twigs. Finding the doorway, it hesitated a moment before going out into the open air outside. Margaret smiled to herself, thinking about how the butcher would be getting quite the surprise with his new caller. The man had been quite the problem ever since he first came to town 2 years ago. More than once, he had stirred everyone up to the point that they tried to permanently drive her out of Southmore. That last time, he finally succeeded, and now she lived outside of the town in her little hovel. It was so quiet on the edge of the meadow. So far, the distance had proven to be very effective deterrent, but knew that could change at any time. Memories of the mob that night came flooding back in. They were bearing torches and were threatening to burn her out. Her dread at the images turned into an involuntary shudder. Shouts and cries filled that impossible night. A torch was thrown into one of the open windows of the little wattle and daub house. What had been a comfortable place to live was consumed by the blaze. Upon reaching the thatching of the roof, the blaze became a major inferno. Burning embers sailed up into the air to some of the nearby houses. The thatched roofs went up in flames to add to the conflagration that had started. When the sparks and embers began to fall on the mob is when they noticed it. They turned their attention to forming a fire brigade to save the buildings. That single event is what allowed Margaret to escape with her life. Since that horrendous night, she had nightmares that it would happen to her again. She stood for a moment, trying to get all of the images out of her head. As her head cleared, she realized it would probably be best if she wasn't home. Now would be a good time to visit her patient. Besides, she liked spending time at Mrs. Ludlow's house. Since it would be winter soon, unfortunately, the flowers of spring and summer would now be gone. The very few that were left would at least lend a little brightness, especially the roses. She was glad that the woman's house wasn't in town where some of the townsfolk could see her. Simply following the forest trail around the long way would bring her to the front door. Just before heading outside, she also grabbed some echinacea so that they could have some tea during her visit. It should help with a few of the symptoms by itself. With it warming up nicely for the day, she decided to carry her cloak in a basket. It could get a little chilly later. She ducked out of the doorway and headed down the forest trail. Mr. Frost, the butcher, was readying himself to prepare some meat for the day in his shop. He was hefting onto the stump the lamb's quarter that was delivered by the farmer early in the morning. With saw in hand, he was going to cut it up into the amounts necessary for the day. In the back of his mind, he hoped that today all of it would sell. All too often, he had too much and had to throw some of it out. That is such a waste when that happens. Over a year ago, he came to the little town where he set up his butcher shop. It always took time to get any business going well. This one seemed to be taking longer than usual to get started than before. When he first came to the town, he had jet black hair. During that time, his hairline steadily receded and became more and more grey. He was sure that it was the worrying how he would keep the shop going that was causing it to become more pronounced. He decided that witchcraft might be something that could be at fault. Since he didn't understand what Margaret was doing, he thought she could be casting spells. Who ever heard of easing childbirth? Far too proud to ask questions about what was really going on, and not being really interested in the answers, he just assumed the worst. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see something moving into the room from the doorway. He attempted to keep his attention on the saw he was attempting to operate. "We're not open yet." Receiving no response, he quit attempting to cut the meat and turned observe the intruder. Seeing the glowing blue mist creeping in began to frighten him immensely. Pooling up in the middle of the room, it started to take shape. His eyes got wide and he dropped his arms to his sides. Frozen in place, he couldn't move. His mind became a complete blank. The ethereal form came closer to him, and he ran outside. when he seen that it came doorway to stand there. It now displayed glowing red eyes and fangs as the butcher's face began to show his abject terror. His legs took over as he began to run down the street heedlessly. Many came to their doors and watched him fly on by shrieking. Many of the townsfolk was wondering what happened to him. Together, some of the neighbors began to talk about what they had just seen. A few stated it could be witchery afoot, and many were quickly beginning to think that Margaret might be the one responsible. She's always been trouble. We shouldn't have ever let her stay. We should burn her on stake. She could feel what was being said in the little town as she was approaching the main road. While the little trail offered pretty good cover that wouldn't hold true in the open space she was coming to. Out of habit, she put her cloak on and pulled the hood over her head. Then she observed the butcher running by as fast as his legs could carry him away from the town. Stopping in place on the little trail, she gasped, "Oh no, not again." Seeing him run by, she knew that she would have to travel once again. No matter what, she wouldn't be visiting Mrs. Ludlow today. Turning around, she headed back up the trail to her hovel. For a few moments, she looked around and the memories returned of building it. Sighing, she resigned herself to what she knew she must do. Not seeing the need to keep quiet what she really was, she decided to take a chance. No one was nearby to see. For a moment she wished that she really could fly, but that was impossible. Oh well, time to make do. She said the words of a spell she remembered well, and a whirlwind started to swirl around. The tempest changes all. What was once big is now small, gathered together for the wanderer. Everything in Hovel began to shrink until it was in a tiny pile. After living so many places over the last 350 years, it was the only way of life that she knew. It seemed to be a never-ending cycle. So many different places she ended up having to move from. Now that she was prepared to travel, Margaret gathered everything into a small bundle and found a stick to suspend it from. From long experience, many would think she was a tinker. The only time that impression was a problem was when someone started to wonder where the wagon they expected would have was at. She then spoke a few more words of another conjuration which would change her appearance. Hopefully there wouldn't be anyone that she came across that would be very inquisitive. Essence of age becomes me. What was new is now old. A vagabond I will be on a journey untold. In a matter of moments, she began to look like an old man, wearing a grey beard and white hair. With the change in appearance, she looked a bit more what she actually did when she wasn't using any magic. The last but not least item was the staff leaning up next to the doorway. Grabbing it as she passed through the door, she held it in one of her hands. It would help set the pace of her steps as she moved along. Hoisting her little burden onto her other shoulder, she began to follow the road to wherever it would lead her. She began to sing the first stanza of the song she had so many times before over the centuries. The road leads ever on into the distance beyond, to new places far away, beginning of a new day. Heading out the door, she looked back at the place she called home. Wishing it well, she headed around the long way so that she could take the road back through town. She wondered if it had changed very much since she had been there last. Once again, a memory of what had happened before crept through her mind and caused her to shiver. Steeling herself, she continued on her way. It wasn't a moment too soon that she started on her journey as an old travelling vagabond. The mob passed her with torches burning as they turned off into the woods. With her head down, she walked along as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She breathed a sigh of relief that none of them recognized her, but she had momentarily forgotten how different she now looked. There probably wasn't anyone that would recognize her now. On into the distance, she began to sing the whole song once she was sure that she was out of passerby earshot. The road leads ever on into the distance beyond, to new places far away. Beginning of a new day. The past is now gone. Into the future beyond, many places far away, into a brighter day. Margaret wasn't quite sure where she was going, but she would know the place when she had finally seen it. Like so many times before, it would come to her in a dream where that was, probably tonight. Reaching the crossroads, she looked both ways. A thick blanket of leaves edged the road that was extending either way into the distance. So many choices were available to her from this place. Which way will I go from here? She closed her eyes and thought about the future. The end novum vicino's tap, tap. The noise awakened him from a deep sleep and that wonderful dream he was having. What a nice one it was too, with that brunette who was so damned hot. The two of them had been making love on the deck of the boat while they were sailing along. The sun, the waves, the wind all seemed so real and perfect. I wish that would have really happened. He smiled to himself as his reverie still captivated his thoughts. Even better, in the dream he didn't have any grey hair. Tap, tap. Hearing the sound again caused him to sit up on the queen-sized bed and look around the room. Everything in the bedroom looked just like they did earlier in the day, except for the shadows. Even the hallway looked the same that was visible through the glass panels in the French doors. I really need to get some curtains for those soon. That was something he now remembered the realtor had mentioned as he became sentient. During the weeks of waiting for the closing, it was one of those things that didn't seem all that important. Somehow they went from looking charming to something that was now rather disturbing with that applique spider web he decorated one of them with. Getting up, Josh went to the window and put his hands on the sill so could look out. There wasn't much to see, the driveway between the two houses. The late fall chill was very noticeable as it transferred through the glass into his fingertips. This is the first night in the new place. I'm sure I'll get used to this house. Now what in the hell is making the noises that's woken me tonight? Heading back to bed, he heard the noises behind him again. Tap, tap. The hair on his arms and the back of his neck stood on end, and his skin felt prickly. This is definitely getting on my nerves. Rousing himself from the bed, he made his way over to the window once again. An eerie feeling came over him and caused his stomach to churn. Just before he reached the window, he heard the sound once again. Tap, tap. Pulling the curtain back, he peered out of the window. Observing the branch blowing back and forth and hitting the casement eased his concerns. Relief flooded in as he breathed a heavy sigh while he stood there watching it move. Letting the curtain fall back down, he headed back to bed once more. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, the tension he felt twisted within. His stomach wasn't calming down, and trying to will it to ease just wasn't working. Tap, tap. His ears located where the sound was coming from this time. Groaning, he rose to his feet and stepped over to the window to look out again. Man, this is really getting tedious. Pulling back the curtain this time, he was seeing some kind of glowing ball that was floating along. It faintly lit the concrete of the driveway and the light fog. His attention was riveted as he watched it floating by. He wanted to go out to touch it, but yet was frozen in amazement. Slowly it moved along to the garage door and then disappeared over the 6-foot-high privacy fence. Josh stood there gazing out a few minutes to see if anything else would happen, but nothing did. It seemed to him the mystery was now solved as he headed back to bed. Lying down, he pulled the covers over himself and fell into a dreamless sleep for the rest of the night. Waking to a bright, shining morning, the events of the evening were still fresh in his mind. Dressing quickly, he went out to the driveway, past the plastic molded pumpkin by the door. He ran to where the glowing orb went over the fence last night. Peering over it to the other side, he now could see something that he hadn't noticed when he looked at the house. Why didn't I see those before? Row upon peaceful row of headstones greeted his vision. The cemetery was beautifully accented by the fall colors of the trees edging it. The unpleasant realization hit him that he might get a few more rather unwelcome visitors if he continued to live here. Why did I have to move in just before Halloween? Is it too late now to get out of that damned contract I signed the other day? The end liturgy won. The full moon was reflecting on the shimmering water of the lake. An owl hooting in the distance broke the quiet of the evening and startled the young woman. Momentarily, she was yanked back into an awareness of her surroundings. A single coherent thought flashed through her mind. What in the hell are you doing out here, Angel? Her vision was pulled once more into darkened oblivion. Her thin nightgown swayed against her lithe, supple body as she walked in the pale moonlight. Goosebumps raised on her arms as each step carried her closer to the red glow in the grass. Something she couldn't understand or break the hold of was drawing her closer. Kneeling down, she reached into the dew-laden tuft of grass. Tendrils of red light reached out and wrapped around her hand. Levitating out of the grass, the crystal floated to just above her hand. There it hovered for a few moments before dropping into her open palm. Standing up, she turned and headed back to her warm bed in the little bungalow. The hem of her wet gown clung to her knees as she walked. Entering the house, she left the back door open. Oblivious to everything surrounding her, she headed to the bedroom. Pulling the covers over herself, she became still, the sounds of her breathing becoming deeper. Both hands were cupping the now warm crystal against her chest as she lay curled up in fetal position. The entity within was becoming intricately linked with her as she slept. Bathing the room in the red glow, it began to pulsate in time with her beating heart. The next morning, she woke to find the crystal in her hands. Holding it out to see it better, she gave it a distasteful look. What the hell is that? She tossed it onto the nightstand, where it bounced off of the battery-operated alarm clock. The jarring sound caused her to turn her head to see what she had hit. Grabbing the sheet and comforter, she flipped them off and exposed the dirt and grass smeared over them. Demanding an answer, her sleep-befuddled mind questioned, "What happened to me last night?" She searched her memory, but couldn't remember what she did the night before. A disconcerting reality now sunk in. I must have been sleepwalking, but I don't think I've done that before. Swinging her legs over the side, she sat up. Bewildered, she looked at the sheets once more. Breathing a heavy sigh, she got up. Yanking the bedding off of the bed, she threw them into a pile by the door. As it landed, a black streak dashed by and sat behind the corner of the bed, looking out with wide eyes. She attempted to placate the cat. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Jet." Meow. He looked at the pile and then gazed at her intently wide-eyed. Apparently satisfied nothing else would happen, for the moment the cat began to look disinterested and lick his paws. Taking off her nightgown, she hung it on one of the pegs on the closet door and went into the bathroom to take a shower. Turning it as hot as it would go, she stood under the steaming water. It felt good on her skin as the rest of the dirt washed down the drain. She stood under the spray with her eyes closed, enjoying the sensation. Once she dried off and brushed out her hair, she went back into the bedroom and opened the closet door. Inspecting the choices available, she almost took out a pair of sweats and a t-shirt. After considering that outfit for a moment, she discarded the idea. She finally picked out a white blouse and jeans and put them on. She thought for a moment about how the white blouse would show off her long black hair. Picking up the sheets, she put them in the hallway washing machine. Turning it on, she went into the kitchen where she noticed the back door still standing open. Stopping in the entryway for a moment, she scanned the room to see if anything was missing. Then she remembered the mud and grass, which caused her to shiver. She said as she stepped over and closed the door. Setting up the coffee maker, she turned it on, and soon the wonderful smell was wafting through the air. While waiting for it to finish its task, she sat down at the table for a few minutes until her stomach grumbled. Okay, I'll feed you. Just shut up. Getting up from her chair, she got out a cup from the cabinet and set it on the counter. Opening the fridge, she pulled out the eggs and began frying a few of them on the stove. As she was putting them on the plate, the burbling sound indicated that the coffee was ready. Pouring some in the cup, she went to sit down at the table to eat in the quiet of the morning. The warmth of the sun shining in the window felt good on her skin. The apparent normalcy felt great to her after whatever had happened the night before. While she ate her breakfast, the red pulsating glow down the hallway went unnoticed. Bathing the bedroom, it grew brighter as the crystal fed upon Angel. Rising above the nightstand, it began to spin in place. Finishing eating, she decided to get a little more reading done. Besides, getting lost in a story was something very calming for her, and after last night, she could use some of that. Placing the dishes in the sink, she went into the living room. Sitting down in her favorite chair by the window, she picked up the dog-eared novel she had been reading. She smiled when she thought about how Neil used to hate her reading those types of books. He called them trashy. What the hell did he know? It wasn't like he ever treated me right the whole time we were together. Seeing that there was a lap available, Jet came to her chair and jumped up onto her legs. He rubbed his nose on her hand insistently until she began to pet him. It made it difficult to hold the novel in her other hand, but she managed. Plopping down on her legs, his motor began running, showing his contentment. Stopping reading for a moment as she peered into his closed eyes, she started scratching his ears. "You sure are a little love bug today, aren't you?" With the cat purring away, she let Jacqueline Morris carry away into the beautiful romance she had written. Their first kiss was just as perfect as she wished it would be for her in real life. Closing her eyes, she could imagine having a trellis just like that in the backyard, the aroma from the climbing roses hanging in the air. The bright, beautiful moon overhead was shining down on the two of them. Breathing a sigh that real life for her wasn't all that wonderful, she knew she could always hope. She continued to read further, then out of the corner of her eye, she caught a familiar sight. That all too recognizable ugly green pickup truck was parked along the curb. Oh my God, I never heard him drive up. What is Neil doing here? I thought I made it clear that I never wanted to see him again. Setting her book down on the table, she moved the cat off of her lap. Meow! The startled cat indignantly protested his disturbance. Barely masking her anger, she attempted an explanation for the cat. "I'm sorry, buddy, but I have to get up now. I need to take care of something." As she got up from the chair, she heard the knock on the door. Dread filled her as she crossed the room. Despite knowing who it was, she looked through the peephole anyway. There he stood wearing the same jean jacket and jeans that he always wore. She contemplated acting as if she wasn't home, but decided he had probably seen her sitting in the chair reading. That might just be acting a little childish. Chiding herself with a sigh, she turned the knob and swung the door open. Without greeting him, she spat out the words, "I thought I told you not to come back. So why did you come here?" Neil showed his usual devil-may-care attitude in his reply. "Oh, I just wanted to come by and see you." Now that she asked why he was at her door, she really wasn't concerned with the reason. She realized she didn't really care. She just wanted him gone. "You need to leave now, please." "It doesn't matter your reason for coming here. I just want you to go away and not come back." "Oh, I know you don't really want me gone. Besides, Angel, I can't get you out of my head." Thinly veiled exasperation showed in her voice. "I'm sure you can't, Neil, but can I be any clearer than saying I don't want you here?" His eyes pleaded with her, "But I've been thinking about you, Angel." Pursing her lips together, she frowned. "Yeah, right. Like all those times you slept around on me. I'm sure you were thinking about me then too." She wanted to slam the door in his face, but at the same time had this morbid curiosity about what he was going to say next. "I know that I wasn't the best boyfriend at times. I need for you to forgive me." Venom dripped in her words she spoke. "I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive you, Neil." She felt something welling up within her as the entity began to control her. A light red hue colored everything within her vision. Her fingers began to pulsate. Little sparks began to dance from the tips. The deep voice she began to speak with shocked her, but she didn't care. Anger filled her entire being. She realized he wasn't aware of the danger he was in yet. "Look at how pathetic and clueless he is." She pointed at him, intending to punctuate her warning for him to leave. Without her knowing, the entity controlled her actions. As she raised her arm, energy released out her fingertips to become a beam. His eyes got wide in shock and fear as he began to cower before her. "What the fuck is happening, Angel?" She didn't answer as power began to surge through her. Its electric current filled her entire being. Pointing at him, a beam hit him in the stomach like a punch. His body folded like he had been punched as he began to levitate above the pavement. He rolled end over end until coming to a stop when hitting the tree in the yard. His face registered his shock in raised eyebrows and gaping mouth. Staring at her, he stammered, What? Her head tilted to the side as she began to laugh with malevolence, filling her thoughts. "I so want to make him pay. He'll think twice before he does that to anyone again." She pulled her hand back like she was going to throw a ball. Swinging it quickly forward, she opened her hand towards him. His body slid up the tree until his head hit a branch and then came back down. Through gritted teeth, she growled at him, "You may want to leave while you still have the chance, asshole." He shook his head as he got to his feet. "Okay, I'm leaving now. I won't bother you again, I promise. Just don't hurt me anymore, Angel." Narrowing her eyes, "It would be far too easy to hurt you when I remember how you treated me." Neil watched her intently as he backed away from the house. Reaching the pickup truck, he stood at the tailgate for a few moments. He raised his hand as if he was going to wave goodbye to her. Sighing, he dropped his arm and went to the driver's door. Opening it, he slid behind the wheel as he kept an eye on her through the passenger window. He contemplated what happened just a few minutes before, but those green eyes he swore were glowing. As a shiver traveled up his spine, he tried to put the key in the ignition. Dropping them on the floorboard, he reached down to get them. Sitting up with keys in hand, he caught something he couldn't comprehend moving out of the corner of his eye. A dark shape was coming very fast towards him that just looked like a blur. He could discern a face with glowing eyes and sharp teeth that was flying at him. His mind shouted, "What the fuck is happening?" With the shiver extending throughout his body, he shoved the key in and turned it. The moment the engine caught, he stomped on the accelerator as hard as he could. Squealing tires left a trail of acrid black smoke in the air. Looking in his rear-view mirror, he could see something dark flying at the vehicle. Go, go, go. He hit the dash as he urged the old truck to speed up. He was thankful that the tires started gaining traction. I don't want to go anywhere near that house again. Checking the mirror again, he breathed a sigh of relief at only seeing the road in the reflection. She stood at the doorway until he disappeared from view. Closing it, she headed back to the living room to read her novel once again. A vision of blood flowing down the walls made her stop in place. Horrified, she blinked her eyes. When she opened them again, everything in the hallway went back to normal. I swear I was just seeing things. There's no way that shit could have been real. Sighing a breath of relief that he was now gone, she went back into the living room. Shaking her head, she sat down on the chair and picked up the book once again. While she lost herself in the sweet romance, the crystal quit spinning. Its red pulsating light went dim. It would bide its time patiently. Satiated for now, it looked forward to helping release the deeper anger Angel held. Too, glancing up from her book to see the wall clock, she noticed that it was beginning to get late. Cupping a hand in front of her mouth, she yawned as she placed the marker between the open pages. Closing the book, she sat it on the end table next to the chair. Reaching up to turn off the floor lamp, she rose from her chair and headed towards the bedroom. Flicking on the bedroom light, the freshly cleaned bedding looked inviting. Removing her clothes, she laid them on the chair sitting by the closet door. Slipping on the nightgown, the cotton print felt so comfortable against her skin. She noticed the alarm clock still laying on its back from being knocked over that morning. Beside it, the crystal still sat where it had landed on the nightstand. Picking up the alarm clock, she set it up the right way and checked to make sure it was working. She considered briefly moving the crystal from its place, but it looked kind of decorative there. I can always move it to somewhere else later, maybe tomorrow. Besides, it's not hurting anything where it's sitting tonight and I'm tired. Turning off the light switch by the doorway, she turned around in the darkness. A faint red glow illuminated the top of the nightstand and surrounding area, which caught her attention. Crossing the room to inspect it closer, she picked up the crystal and took a closer look. After satisfying her curiosity, she decided it must be some natural feature of the translucent object. Pulling back the sheets, she sat down on the bed and yawned once more. Lying back, she pulled the covers over her as she snuggled into the fluffy pillows. She closed her eyes and sleep quickly overcame her. Soon after her breathing deepened, her body elevated to hover just above the mattress. Without the bedding holding her in place, she would have floated around the room. Through the night, she had many vivid dreams. Most of them could best be described as nightmares. In the last, and by far the scariest one, she found herself standing at the top of a cliff, and fire stretched as far as her eye could see. A soft glow reflected off of the roof, and faint smoke that was rising from the flames. Pungent odors assaulted her senses in this nightmarish place she found herself. Her thoughts uncontrollably raced in fear. What's this place? It's really strange it doesn't feel all that hot here. Before an answer would manifest itself to her, wheezy breaths below the edge caught her attention. She gazed at something regarding her with a pair of yellow glowing eyes. As it began reaching the place she was standing, it swiped at her feet with blackened scaly claws. She stepped back in time and caused the creature to just miss her. In its rage, it uttered an ear-piercing screech. Scanning the area quickly, she tried to spot some place to hide without success. What is that thing? Where in the hell am I? It shocked her to realize that this just might be hell she found herself. Her heart was pounding loudly within her chest. The expanse that extended behind her of flat, cracked rock offered no sanctuary. Continuing to back away, she stumbled and fell. Landing awakened her to hear the sounds of her own screaming in her bedroom. Cold sweat covered her whole body and drenched the bedding as terror caused her to violently shake. Sitting up, she recognized a few of the things close by that were illuminated the soft red glow. It relieved her to find herself back in her little house once more and in relative safety. Everything in the nightmare was gone. Taking a few deep breaths, she closed her eyes while she willed the jitters to subside and her hands to quit shaking. As her mind cleared, she feared going back to sleep. "I think I'll have a cup of tea and do some reading." "Yeah, that sounds good." Rubbing her eyes, she turned the covers back and got out of bed. Passing through the living room, she picked up the novel and walked into the cool kitchen and turned on the light. The sudden brightness caused her to blink and shade her eyes. Setting the book on the counter, she grabbed the tea kettle from the back of the stove and filled it at the sink. Setting it on the burner, she lit the flame. As she pulled out the tin of loose chamomile, she could hear the sizzling sounds of the water heating up. Opening the tea ball, she dipped it in the loose tea until it was half full. Folding it closed, she secured the two halves together and placed it in the cup along with 2 teaspoons of sugar. Stretching her arms out as she yawned, she came close to knocking the tea kettle off of the stove. The heat of the burner instantly registered on her forearm. Yanking her arm back, she placed both of her hands on the counter. While waiting for the water to boil, she looked at the cabinets in front of her. "I've never liked that color on the cabinets. I think that would be a great weekend project." Turning to see the entire kitchen, she tried to think of what color she wanted, but nothing came to mind. She realized she probably wasn't awake enough for those kinds of decisions. Thankfully, she heard the pot begin to whistle as it signaled it was ready. Any of her home decorating choices would be delayed for the moment. Pouring in some of the hot water, she carried the cup and the book over to the table. The aroma of the chamomile grew stronger as it steeped under her nose. Closing her eyes, she breathed in the pleasant scent and smiled in her enjoyment. Her mind was carried back a moment to a memory of the lake where her parents would take her on vacation every summer. The birds, the water, and the sand of that place meant home to her. It was part of the reason she picked this particular place to live at now. So much of this place was so similar to that time so long ago when she was a child. Taking walks along the little beach around the lake felt like heaven. Seeing the glint of the sun on the water and hearing the breeze rustle in the tall grass refreshed the soul. After living with Neil, she felt she needed to clear her head. She really felt that this place would do the trick. Here she began to feel free once more after what had been a very controlled existence. He seemed to want to know about every little thing she did, so there was never any such thing as privacy for her. When he raised his hand back at her, literally was the last straw for her. It was far too easy to see what would be happening if she didn't do something. The very next day, she packed a few things in a suitcase and left. She thought she had walked out of his life forever. She looked around the kitchen once again as she took another sip of the soothing chamomile tea. Savoring the experience, she set the cup down and picked up the novel. Taking a look at where the marker was at, she noticed she didn't have very much left to read. Opening it up to her last place, she sat the bookmark beside the cup. Well, I might as well finish it. The crinkle of the turning pages synced with her occasional sips from the cup. Soon the book was finished, and the cup sat empty next to it on the table. She sat for a few minutes thinking about the ending of the sweet romance story that she had just read. In the bedroom, the crystal started glowing brighter. Ascending up from the nightstand, it began to rotate as it hovered above the surface. Moving slowly at first, it began speeding up. Beams of red light flashed around the entire room until it appeared continuously bathed in brightness. Able to escape its close confines, something dark began to take shape in the middle of the floor. It searched around the room with glowing yellow eyes and fangs. acting as if it was sniffing the air it located where Angel was at in the house. It made its way down the hall to the kitchen entryway where it stood back and observed her. Pushing the chair back, she started to get up so that she could go back to bed. Dissipating a little, it moved along the floor to underneath the table by her feet. As she reached for the cup to take it to the sink, the entity crept up her body and joined itself into her. She swayed a moment as it took her over completely. Her eyes turned pure white as in jerky motions she sat back down on the chair. Staring at the wall, she awaited the desire of her captor. 3 sparks arced over her hair and along her skin as it bleached to an absence of color, her complexion assuming a deathly pallor. Dark circles appeared under her eyes as they turned from their customary green to a bright red. Stationary, unaware of anything around her, she sat in a vegetative state. Her mind was contorted in its struggle with the entity that came from the crystal. A battle of wills had begun for control of Angel's body. Into the dawning of the next day, it seemed that neither would win. Sensing that Neil was returning soon, the entity within increased its exertions for total control of Angel. The deep-seated anger Neil carried within could prove quite useful, it felt. Using the part of her mind that it controlled fully, it sent a telepathic message to urge Neil to hurry. Driving in the pickup, he could feel something that was calling him from a distance. He jabbed the gas pedal harder as he urged the old green truck to move faster. The destination became the focus as the speedometer passed 50 miles per hour if he had bothered to notice it. He argued with himself as he drove along. There's no way those things happening yesterday at Angel's was real, was there? Well, I'll show her when I see her this morning. How dare that bitch be trying to get away from me? Knowing its next chosen host was on his way, delighted the entity. In the bedroom, the crystal continued to hover as it spun in place. Red light illuminated the entire room. Angel got up from the chair and walked through the living room. As she passed by the chair that Jet was laying on his hackles, raised and he hissed at her. Ignoring him as he ran behind the sofa, she continued to make her way to the bedroom. Getting close to the nightstand, she extended her arm. The crystal floated over to just above her hand and laid itself into her open palm. Turning slowly, her stilting steps carried her towards the front door. The crystal held out in front of her like a pagan offering. Reaching the door, she opened it and stepped out on the porch to await Neil's imminent arrival. An old woman walking her dog crossed the street quickly on seeing the deathly apparition. As she urged her barking dog along faster, the color returned to Angel's complexion. Driving as quickly as he could, he barely avoided several accidents. The pickup swayed violently with every close call. All that he could think about was how she had gotten away from him. He decided he would tell her that she had to come home with him now. Turning the corner to her house, his focus became the white single-story bungalow. Squinting at the figure on the porch, he wondered what she was doing standing out there. That was something that was uncharacteristic of her to do, and yet she looked the same as always in her cotton print nightgown. He contemplated a moment over why she was there, but his ego prevented his seeing the obvious answer. She must have sensed I was on my way and knew she had to be waiting for me. Slowing down, he came to a stop beside the curb. Sitting for a few moments behind the wheel, he watched Angel as she walked towards him. Her steps no longer stilting, she walked along appearing totally normal, even with the entity now in complete control. He opened the door with every intention of having her ass sitting in the passenger side. Thoughts of her coming along with him filled his mind. It didn't occur to him to consider the thing she was carrying in her hand. Meeting her on the sidewalk, he opened his arms to wrap them around her. Before he could encircle her, it was as if a jolt travelled through him from her. It caused him to stagger and stop in mid-stride. Something black rushed into him, and everything within his sight darkened. Released suddenly by the entity, Angel fainted and fell on the pathway. No longer held in her grip, the crystal hovered in place a moment and then moved towards him. His fingers opened involuntarily as it moved into his grip. Wavering a few moments in place, his eyes and skin turned white. In jerky movements, he turned around and lurched back toward the driver's door. Sliding behind the seat, he slams the door closed. The truck rocked with the violence. His dead white eyes peered down at the crystal in his hand. Sneering, he threw it on top of the dash. Hitting the windshield, it caused a crack to begin at the bottom. Pulling the keys out of his pocket, he selected one and held it out, acting in exaggerated movements. Jamming the key in the ignition, he turned it as the truck roared to life. Stomping on the gas pedal, he peeled away from the curb. Tires squealed as the rear end of the old truck fish-tailed. Finally catching, after a short distance, the truck lumbered down the road. Smoothing out as it picked up speed, it began to steady itself. Staring out through the window, he didn't notice he was speeding through the town's traffic lights. After several blocks, a police car took up chase. Following close behind, its siren blared a warning to any passerby. The pickup moved towards the river bridge at 80 miles per hour. Hitting the ramp up to the deck, the truck lurched into the air. Landing on top of the railing, the gas tank split and splashed the liquid everywhere. As the truck fell down towards the water, a spark set off the volatile substance. The resulting fireball burnt the paint off the side of the bridge and arced through the air towards the pickup. Reaching the now ripped open gas tank, it exploded and caused it to flip over onto its top. Hitting the water, the pickup sank to the bottom and buried itself in the deep mud up to the wheel wells. Water seeping in filled the cab very slowly. Removing itself from Neil, the entity transferred back into the crystal, now lying on the inside of the roof. The fading red glow clearly showed the water level to him as he came to. Attempting to grab a breath, he raised up towards the floorboards. Taking a deep breath, he explored the windows, trying to open them. Opening his eyes caused them to burn from the river water. Noticing the deep mud against the glass, he panicked. Slamming his fists into the glass proved ineffective to release him from his watery tomb. When he realized that all was lost, he felt calm began to descend upon him as the red light shining from the crystal faded. With his last gasp, the darkness welcomed his long tortured soul. The crystal now awaited a new host that would come as they always had throughout the millennia. The end about the stories. Many fiction stories start with a question of what if this or that happened. These short stories are no exception to that rule. All of the stories were written in October-November 2012. They seem to mix together well to become this compilation you've just read. It's also the first project I worked on with my new Acer laptop computer. Of course, whole house Wi-Fi has made some of the research much easier as you are connected all of the time everywhere in the house. When you think about something, it's possible to look it up rather easily. On the following pages, I will divulge what got me thinking along the lines that I have. These were always intended to be short stories first of all, and in short stories commonly you don't digress into all of the storyline that comes to mind. After the party, the scene in Warlock, Lion's Gate 1998, where the woman gives birth at the beginning of the movie, began playing over and over in my mind one day. Somehow that movie mixed together with the song Bark at the Moon by Ozzy Osbourne, CBS 1983, to become the story you've read in this compilation. It began with the question, what would happen if a woman got pregnant by a demon, after one very wild night. Dance of Death. This story originated with an Iron Maiden album of the same name as the story you've just read, and mixed with an old Chinese horror story. In the Chinese story, the first emperor of China had a number of dead troops reanimated to help his efforts during a battle. In the Iron Maiden album, the songs Passchendaele and Montsegur mostly played into the storyline. This story began with the question of what would have happened if there was a disastrous screw-up in the mustard gas mixture. What if it didn't work as intended? The central character is Sergeant Peter Casey, who served during World War I with the Royal Munster Fusiliers. He was the great-grandfather of Michael H. Hansen, who is a good friend of mine and quite a talented author. I kept the timeline for when Sergeant Casey served in France, and of course there was trench warfare at the time. That unit later became the beginnings of the IRA, which led the ending of the story, where they create a pact very similar to the one the IRA originally created. One day I do plan on writing an actual history of this unit, a complete historical novel which should be interesting for me since I am an avid history buff. A lot of research went into the weaponry and facets of trench warfare during World War I. Of special note, from what I was able to research, mustard gas wasn't actually used in combat until 1 year later in 1917 near Ypres, Belgium, according to Wikipedia. However, based on further research, I'm not positive the Wikipedia article is entirely correct, after having read some of the accounts written by the soldiers who actually served. For the storyline, I went with the frontline accounts. I figure the frontline soldiers would have known since they were actually there. A little of the idea also came from Saving Private Ryan and numerous other World War I-based movies like In Love and War, 1996. Seeing those movies allowed me to envision various aspects of trench warfare as it happened in World War I. En las sombras. This story started with two songs running around in my head. Children of the Sun, Capricorn 1979, by Billy Thorpe and Take Me Away, Columbia 1983, by Blue Oyster Cult. Of course, the songs mixed with hundreds of alien abduction stories that I've read over the years. The question of what would happen came up at the right time to end up as the story in the compilation. While this story doesn't have a paranormal aspect to it, if you think about it, the story is a bit scary. Being captured by some creatures from another planet, and you don't know why, has left many with sleepless nights throughout history. Contemporary UFO abduction reports date to around 1954, from what I could find in my research. However, reports of UFOs in the skies even appear in ancient Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek texts. In other words, people have been contemplating the possibility for a long time. Witchery afoot. This little story began when for some reason The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, 1960 episode of Twilight Zone, mixed with Witch Hunt, Anthem 1981, by Rush. It was originally in Erica Sabo's short story competition, where it reached second place and it stayed there. It's also the first of these short stories that I had written. For this compilation, I expanded the storyline a little to make a fuller story. The question that started this story is what would happen if I went back in time to when the witch hunts happened. The witch hunts are a fascinating subject and always have been. While they aren't directly related to the Inquisition, they were an outgrowth of the same mentality. Even today we talk about someone being the subject of a witch hunt. It's also the basis of the storyline of many movies over the years. Novum Vicinos. What would happen if I moved into a house that's next to a graveyard? Even better, what if some of the spirits from the graveyard came to visit me in my new house? That could easily be a disturbing thought. My own little personal ghost story is what part of this story is based on. It was 1976, and we'd just moved into a new house. My bedroom had a French door that led into it, kind of like what's in the short story. I envisioned double French doors for the story, though. One night I heard a tap a couple of times, which woke me from a deep sleep. When I went to the window, I seen what appeared like a glowing ball that passed by. I still to this day don't know why I had seen it. On top of all that, one of my dear friends, Tammy Clark Gibbs, happens to be a real estate agent. She's also quite a talented novelist, and I've a few of her books. Liturgy, The Puzzle Box from Hellraiser, New World Pictures, 1987, by Clive Barker, mixed with some other story ideas I've had over the last 30 years. Parts of this storyline were originally written back in 1984 to 85, and I've always remembered it. At least the concept of a demon-possessed crystal. According to many in New Age religions, crystals vibrate also, which came into play. What if, instead of a puzzle box, there was a crystal? It ended up creating a rather interesting storyline in my head that you've read the results of after it ran around for a while. There is a good possibility that one day I will create an entire novel based on this storyline and the parts I didn't write of, which there are many. Unfortunately, many of those parts just didn't fit into the short story that you've read.